Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review the movie Crank from 2006, supposedly. So, the thing that I honestly like about this movie is we have a very aggressive Jason Statham. Really, you would kind of like this is a very rare performance. Normally, you would just kind of get this very like one kind of note kind of Jason Statham throughout a lot of films. Like I remember watching probably the Jason Statham movie Wild Card, and I was like, okay, here's another time where we get kind of an aggressive Jason Statham kind of beating people up, which that's what I enjoyed about the Jason Statham movie Wild Card. But and some people could say that probably maybe Jason Statham does have some aggressiveness or something like that, probably in movies like maybe Death Race, which eventually ended up like changing when it eventually came to sequels. That they started to rest on certain other characters because, of course, Jason's character eventually ended up escaping after all of it. So, with that said, I really, of course, enjoy Jason Statham's performance in this movie, as well as eventually when he ends up tying himself onto Amy Smart's character. That's just this person that doesn't know what the heck is going on and never really and truly does. And that's the interesting part about that character. But really having Chilios or just Jason Statham in this movie interacting with anybody is just really fun and I enjoy it. So going into this, I think the main reason that I wanted to also see this movie was because I think a lot of people who may have never even watched this film know at least the concept of the movie. A lot of people just go, "Oh yeah, that's the movie where uh, the guy is an adrenaline junkie." Or eventually in the sequel, you'll end up finding out that he ends up having this pacemaker where he basically needs to consistently get electrified to stay alive. It's like, and plus, everybody will always kind of remember that, whether they liked these movies or they hated the movies or whatever, they'll always know the concept at least. So that's the one thing that I was like, oh, okay, well, like at least people want to check this out or remember this movie for whichever reason. So going into this, so really we have Jason Statham's character who ends up getting knocked out and is to be given this Chinese cocktail to force him to go. Like he needs to go and is to mix himself with any kind of thing that'll get his heart pumping. And eventually it gets to the point where we find out that Chev's character is to eventually not have his body be pumping adrenaline. And so eventually Chev's character needs to go and chase after some epinephrine so he can eventually get uh, some real kind of flow of things so that way he can be able to stay alive longer. And so it's basically a movie, it's kind of like a race against time kind of thing, but it's a go kind of movie because it forcibly has to. And that's the thing that you can also enjoy about this movie also is it's a very fast-paced movie because it forcibly needs to, because that's basically the goal of the character is to have this be a very fast-paced film. So with that said, like, so it's basically an adrenaline junkie kind of movie. It's a very quick paced film. And it's even like kind of just like an hour and 20 minutes, which is really good. So supposedly this film right now is on Showtime. I know Showtime does have a the free trial going on right now, but I also watched this movie on an app called Fox HD Movies. If you go into Google Play and you search Fox HD Movies, you can probably watch that and any number of new releases for absolutely free. And also, just go ahead and go into that app. So you can watch Crank and probably the sequel, Crank 2, High Voltage. So, like the logo will say Fox HD Movies, but I think the title will say something different. But so that'll be easy to figure out. If you search Fox HD Movies, you should come up with that app fairly easily. For how many times that I've probably referenced it at some point in time. So with that said, I think it's that coveted time to otherwise say that it's that customary Devil 5 time territory to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time again to spoil this movie. Um, really, I guess the movie just relies a lot on concept, and that's the only thing that I really wanted to just tee it up. Because this is an hour and 20 some odd movie, or 20-minute some odd movie, so I'm like, I don't feel that I need to go like hugely in detail for like the teeing up version. It's either like you probably have eventually heard of this movie or eventually you've seen this film. So, and even the concept, like people know at least what the concept is, so it's kind of like, why even say anything? It's an action movie. It's a fun action movie. So let's go out of our way to go into spoilers. So, very beginning of the film, we have Jason Statham's character, Chev Chilios, waking up from uh, from, of course, his bed, going in, trying to figure out what's going on. All of a sudden, he ends up seeing this disc that says FU on it. And so Chev puts this disc into his player to all of a sudden see his nemesis of this movie, who is to be Verona, who is to tell him that he had put a Chinese cocktail within Chev and that he'll probably end up dying soon. And so all of a sudden, Chev doesn't know what the heck he's supposed to do to keep himself alive, but we can start to see like him dwindling down. And there's also to be this consistent like phone ringing consistently happening through this movie. And I think that's the only like really annoyance that probably some people would be having. Or just like, God, like that ringtone just freaking is annoying. So Chev is to eventually try and desperately call his doctor and then desperately call Amy. And Amy, who is Eve in this movie, Amy Smart, who is to be Eve in this film, Chev is to call her, and like he ends up getting her answering machine because she doesn't have a cell phone. So Chev tells Eve, it's like, honey, like like get a cell phone, like please, because there's gonna be some important stuff going on, like my life on the line, and I can't get to you. Uh, so Chev is to eventually uh, get a hold of his doctor's assistant, and so Frank is to mention that he's like, hey, I'm going to be dead soon unless I get a hold of this doctor. Like, I need to get a hold of him. So it seems that Doc Miles is overseas going and getting a massage. And so eventually his assistant is to let Doc Miles know. And so now, like, Doc Miles has to go and fly overseas to eventually try and make it to really Chev to try to figure out how to help him. And so, first up, we end up having Chev, uh, one, uh, Verona is to tell us, or Verona, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce certain names, and that will become obvious when we go through these. So we're to be told that it seemed that Jake failed at killing a guy named Don Kim, and so you could say failed. I would say that Jason Statham decided to, or Chev decided to not kill this person and decide to let him go. So because of that, that's why he ended up getting the Chinese cocktail into him. So on Chev's first stop, he ends up heading to this guy named Orlando because Chev needs to figure out where Verona is, or Verona. So Chev goes to Orlando and just kind of busts through this place, and then everybody's like holding their guns onto Chev, and Orlando's like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! Like, hold it a minute! Like, I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna speak like gentlemen here, and everything's gonna be fine. Like, nobody's gonna have to shoot anybody up." So Chev asks about a previous job that Orlando and Verona had done together, and Orlando's like, dude, like, I didn't do that job. If anything, I got sift money from that guy. And so if you could find out where he is, like, I will happily go and put a bullet hole in him myself, kind of thing. So Chev is like, oh, okay, well, like, this obviously means, like, I had basically wasted my time coming here. So Chev is to say, hey, like, how about you give me some Coke? And, like, not Coca-Cola. We're talking about drugs Coke. So Orlando ends up giving, of course, Chev some Coke after he exchanges money because drugs aren't for free. So Statham starts, or Chev's character starts going and sniffing Coke right then and there to just kind of figure things out, because Chev is to realize that he needs to uh, like get his adrenaline up, so, or and get him like excited, get him going, get him like moving, and so on and so forth. Because he realizes when he was like driving his car that eventually he was like, whoa, like I'm slowing down a little bit. So we also have Chev, who is to be talking to his seemingly sidekick, a guy named Kalo, and so Chev is talking to Kalo and saying like, hey, if you can figure out where Verona is, let me know. Like, let me know when you spot him. So eventually, Kalo eventually uh, is to tell Chev that he didn't spot Verona, but he ends up spotting Verona's brother. And so Chev is like, great, because that'll lead me to him. So we also have Chev, who ends up talking to seemingly Verona's like boss, a guy named Carlito. So Jason Statham, like, this guy is swimming in this pool, and so Chev goes and jumps into this pool and is now having this conversation while they're swimming together in this pool. And so it seems like that dialogue between the two of them are kind of just going nowhere. Carlito has basically mentioned that there's probably going to be no cure for Chev, that reasonably they give that to horses, like the thing that they gave him. So eventually Chev, like, this whole dialogue is just going nowhere, so we end up jumping out of the pool. There seems to be quite a bit of topless women at some points in this scene is one of those. So, uh, so we go on, and so Chev eventually makes it to Verona's brother, and so they're in some restaurant, and so what happens is that Verona's brother spots Chev, and so he ends up kind of following him into the back of this kitchen and further on into the back of this restaurant, where all of a sudden Chev is to meet this guy with this big cleaver to chop off his hand. And so what ends up happening is, of course, that uh, Chev is to eventually kind of run bullets out of his gun, and he doesn't have any bullets to really kill off this guy because Chev has been doing any number of wild like things. Like he has gone on to do like car chases through a mall and just going and creating all kinds of crazy anarchy, beating up Orlando's gang members and all kinds of stuff, just creating chaos everywhere he is to go. So uh, and so eventually we have Statham, who is to run out of bullets with his gun as he's kind of fighting Verona's brother. And so eventually, what ends up happening is that Chev eventually grabs uh, Verona's brother's own gun and kills him with it, shoots him in the head. And so Kalo ends up getting like blood splattered all over him. So Chev just takes Verona's brother's gun and also his cell phone. So we now have Chev using um, this guy's phone to call his own brother, and Verona is just like, hey, like, and I think that his name was Ricky, but I'm not sure. So on the phone, I believe. So all of a sudden, like this guy is the villain of the story. Is like, hey, bro, how's it going? And then like, and so like Chev is to mention like, hey, you want to suck me off? You want to like, you want to get together and suck one another off? And like, and Verona's like, what the fuck? Like what? And they're like, yeah, like it's me. Like I'm calling from your brother's phone. So all of a sudden this guy's to be so lividly upset because of his older brother ending up getting killed, and so Chev is to mention about this crappy bracelet uh, that is to have been like I guess some family heirloom that this guy is to have, that it's been passed down from generation to generation. And he's like, oh well then hey then like then you'll want this necklace, won't you? Like I'm gonna go and I'll hand it back to you. I'll give it back to you so that way you can have it. All while I'm going to kill you because that's what I'm gonna do also. So so eventually, we eventually have Chev, who is to eventually keep in contact with his doctor, and so Doc Miles is to eventually say this is like a Beijing cocktail, and that eventually he needs to have adrenaline to stay alive. Because the doctor is kind of talking through this guy's symptoms and just saying like, yeah, this sucks. And so we have the doc eventually mentioning that uh, that Chev is eventually going to need epinephrine, and he's going to need a certain portion of it, and so he should go to the hospital to try to find a certain portion of this. So Chev, of course, could barely remember what the thing was. He's like, Epi something. It starts with an E by the time he gets to the hospital. So, so eventually we have Chev who makes it to this over the counter thing and is like, "Hey, I need some epi stuff. I have a heart problem." And so the woman is like, "Epinephrine," and Chev is like, "Yeah, like I need that. I want that." And so the girl's like, "I don't think that I can just give you that." And he's like, "Why not?" And so this girl is like checking over with her like assistant, and so all of a sudden we have Chester Bennington. Um, I'm gonna have to double check that. It's been a while since I've had to say that name. Um, Yeah, I was right. Chester Bennington, of course, if a lot of people know, this guy sadly used to be the lead singer, or one of the lead singers from Linkin Park, and then he ended up passing away. Um, and that was kind of the interesting thing about this movie, was to see Chester in this film. And so Chester is to evidently tell Chev's character to just grab all of this nasal spray, because it has epinephrine in there. So, of course, Chev's character steals all this nasal spray, and then runs off through the hospital to eventually find somebody with a crash cart, or a person with defibrillators, and is like, "Hey, like, you should have epinephrine in here. Give me the shot." And so we have this doctor, of course, that I've only seen him on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. So this guy is to mention, like, well, hey, like, I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to find where it is, because the guy doesn't know where it is in this little thing that he's kind of going with this, what is it called, um, patient patient's bed. So eventually, we have the nurse or the doctor who ends up finding the epinephrine, and so Statham goes and tells this guy to go and defibrillate him, and so this guy does so and knocks him into this elevator, and so we have Chev who ends up giving himself an epinephrine thing, and so he ends up kind of like feeling good. So we all of a sudden have now Chev, who is like running like a maniac throughout parts of town, and so eventually the doctor is to call and say like, "Hey, like, you got the epinephrine, right?" And so Chev is like, "Well, yeah, of course I did." And doctor is like, "Well, what amount did you take?" It's like, "You took all of it, didn't you?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so we have like Doc Miles is like, "Oh my god, like, you should be dead right now, or you're going to be dead soon. Like, is your dangalang whiffy stiffy? Like, do you have a whiffy stiffy right now?" And Chev is like, "Yeah." So the guy is saying that like it should be impossible for Chev's character to eventually pee, let alone do any number of things eventually sometime soon, because he should probably be dead soon. So, like, I feel there was other some kind of other some kind of that's not a sentence. I feel like there was also some other mission that uh, Chev did. Oh yeah. Um, so Chev ends up getting into this gas station, or gas station. Blah. Chev ends up getting into this cab, and so eventually, like, we have Chev who's trying to like get into the music. He's trying to like dance to the music, and so eventually, they go to this convenience store, and Chev ends up putting a gun to the convenience store's guy's head, and then so he ends up going off and getting every single Red Bull and every single energy bleh, can't talk right now, energy drink and any kind of energy kind of stuff that he can possibly get, to eventually just have to waste all of it, because he's just going to eventually need to just keep on moving and keep on going. It's a good thing, I guess, that he doesn't need to fall asleep. So, pushing on, and that happened in the early part of the film. Like, I kind of did, like, this part that happened early, I did it later. So, uh, so now the next thing is going on is that uh, the doc is to just kind of mention, it's like, well, hey, like, now you need something to just kind of like slow yourself, like some kind of weed or some kind of something, but it'll be a miracle if you can get that, or if you can get it quick enough, because you're probably going to die. So eventually, Shev makes his way to Eve's place because there is that worry that uh, that Shev is going to think that Eve is going to be dead if he doesn't find her, because eventually someone is going to kill her. Shev even calls Eve and tells her this, but she ignores him. So eventually, Verona is to say, "Hey, let's go and get Eve. Let's go and get her." So when Chev is to be at Eve's place and they try to leave, eventually there is to be a number of certain amount of guys that are going and trying to kill Eve or Chev, and Chev goes and kills them without Amy realizing it, as Chev forcibly dumps all of Eve's purse stuff onto the ground. So eventually, what ends up happening is Chev now has to explain to Eve who he really is, and that he did not kill this guy named uh, Don Kim, and that he decided that it wasn't the right thing, and uh, but there is kind of like this back and forth discussion between the two of them. So, uh, because Chev's character was to mention to Eve that he was some like gaming programmer or something, which actually was just a lie. So eventually, Chev got that all off his chest, and so eventually, the very next thing that we are to see is basically just both Chev and Eve going at it in the middle of the street, because, of course, Chev is starting to lose his like adrenaline shot, because eventually he ends up going to Eve's home to make food, and seemingly instead, like they end up going out to this restaurant, and so that's when Chev tells Eve everything. So eventually, we are to transition uh, to eventually have Chev making it to his doctor's place. And once his doctor finally gets a flight there and is able to take patients. So, the doc is to basically say, it's like, well, hey, like, there is no real way to cure all this. There's no antidote, there's nothing that I can come up with. So, like eventually it's just a matter of time before eventually you're just going to end up in a coma, and you're probably going to die after that. So because eventually his body is going to eventually need sleep. So the doc's real solution is to give Chev just the ability to just kind of like knock down the pain, to eventually his last thing is to basically just be this little like lullaby, to eventually head back into sleep. Like, so really the doc is just saying like, hey man, you're going to die, so how about I ease your pain, kind of thing. And really Chev is just like, well, that's great and all, but like I have one last thing to do. Like, I have to get to Verona and kill him, and then that after that I'll be done. I'll be good to go. So Chev ends up telling Eve what he's basically going to do. So so we have Chev that ends up going into this uh building, and he ends up talking to certain characters. Like he ends up talking to uh, where is the names? He ends up talking to a warehouse guy. okay, he ends up just talking to these warehouse guys that really have no name. Isn't that great? Um, which they're just to basically tell him, it's like, hey man, like you should just take uh, you should just take yourself out of the equation, because eventually like you've caused too much chaos, and you should just go and find a nice quiet place to just die. And of course Chevy is just like, no, I'm not going to do that. So Chev has to go and kill through all these people to eventually head to where the building is of where Verona is with Carlito. It seems that Carlito and Verona have kind of teamed up, and so Chev is saying like, oh well, like I guess like Verona is to be like uh, Carlito's woman basically now in a metaphorical sense, and Verona's like, dude, like I tell him how much money like he's to pay me, like, and we work it out like that. So eventually, what ends up happening is they end up taking the guns, and they end up taking his Chev's insulin that he is to have from this little machine. And so Carly looks at that and he's like man, like you're really smart. You've really figured out some kind of way to like just stay alive. It's like, I'm really impressed. And so all of a sudden now Chev has no gun on him, but he is to still figure out how to eventually go on and to start shooting people. And so he ends up taking this finger gun out, and he ends up going and is to like fire at some people, and they end up getting shot, and they end up falling over. Well, we end up finding out that, of course, uh, that Don Kim has decided to align himself with Chev, and like he has a number of guys with him that are to help out go and deduce the numbers of Verona's men. So eventually Verona is running off to get to this helicopter, as well as Carlito has, and we have Carlito who gets to this helicopter, and so Verona ends up shooting Carlito and tossing him out of the helicopter, just like, who's the boss now? He is. So, because Carlito's dead. So, Verona ends up making it into this helicopter, and so, of course, uh, we have Chev's character who goes off and chases after him onto this helicopter, where they end up fighting and battling, and there's to be this consistent thing of them kind of like teetering off of this helicopter, till eventually we just see this scene where they end up just falling out of the helicopter to eventually just fall to their deaths, where we have Chev before they end up impacting and falling to their deaths. We have Chev who ends up breaking the neck of Verona, and then he ends up just like falling to his death, because he's like, well, the one thing that I wanted to do, I accomplished. And here's the interesting thing: we end up having Chev and ending up promising to Eve that he would come back to her, but he ends up calling her and saying like, well, I guess I'm not going to live up to that promise, because he's basically falling to his death and he's going to die. Maybe, because of course, we know that there's a Crank 2. We know that Jason Statham is in Crank 2, so there has to be a reason why he's still alive for a sequel movie, right? So, and if people are interested in having me talk about Crank 2, High Voltage, I'm more than happy to go through and do that in case this movie is to be trending. Um, Plus, also, I apologize uh, if I'm not just quite coherent through this review, just because, it's getting to that time of me wanting to rest my head and call it a day. But I have one more thing after this that I'm to do. Plus, also, I'm just like, because my eyes are all blurry now. So that's great. Do a review where you have to say people's names and your like freaking eyes are all blurry. So, and you have to look at certain cast lists to know who people are. So, isn't that great? So, the last thing that we end up seeing is Chev calling Eve, mentioning that he failed and his promise is going to be broken. So Chev is falling to his death to eventually fall onto this car and this top of this car, and so he crashes into that and eventually falls in the street, and then his face is just to be all bloody, and we're to naturally assume that he's dead. But then sequel though, so really that's the last thing that we are to see, and yeah, so I guess that's a wrap for Crank. Yeah, just some really. I love Jason Statham movies. There's a lot of them that eventually I did eventually want to rewatch. Especially the Transporter one, especially the first one. I really liked that one. There's probably a combination of other Jason Statham movies that I have enjoyed and seen and whatever. Like The Mechanic is actually a really good Jason Statham movie. The One is that Jet Li movie, which mostly focuses on Jet Li. That's still a good movie, but you kind of don't even realize that that's Jason Statham in that movie because he actually has hair. Uh, Wild Card was a good movie. Yeah, kind of just after that, like a lot of people will say, like The Expendables, he was in that. Death Race, I thought was really good. Uh, Other than that, yeah. Um, there might be eventually a Jason Statham movie where I forgot about that's probably really good. Some people might say that Parker is really good. I could have cared less about that film. Uh, but yeah, other than that, I am going to call it a day. I'm going to get out of here to eventually do one last review, and then I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.